Thanks, Kelly.
Good morning to everybody. Thank you so much for joining in. My name is Nagin. I am the president of the Segbay Chamber of Commerce. And again, we thank you for everyone joining in. Just a couple of things before I introduce our amazing panel today. First of all, big thanks to Scott and his team for arranging all of this and making this happen, as well to the other levels of the government that have made the effort to join in as well, to the Segbay Chamber of Commerce, and to the Gravenhurst Chamber of Commerce. Thank you to everyone for working together to make this happen today. What will happen today is there are a series of questions that we will be answering that you have submitted today to us. And as well, you'll note at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A for which you're more than welcome to add any additional questions that you may have. And in addition to that, please note too, we welcome ideas and solutions on some of the problems that have arisen from recent events. We want to collectively work together to get through this and make things happen. If we don't get to all of your questions, please note we will answer them at a later time and you will get a response to that. As well, note today's meeting is broadcasted live on your TV. Thank you to Kojiko for taking care of that for us today. And at the end of our meeting, we will be introducing Sandy Lockhart, Executive Director for the Gravenhurst Chamber of Commerce, and she'll have some additional comments to make before we round off our meeting. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our amazing panel today. We've got our MP, Scott Aitchison, thank you. Our MPP Norm Miller.
Everybody.
Our Georgian Bay Mayor Peter Coetsier. And shortly, we should also be joined in by Gravenhurst Mayor Paul Kelly. Now, before I move on to asking the questions, does anybody from our panel have anything that, I think we've got Mayor Paul Kelly? I think we do.
You need to unmute yourself there, Paul.
There we go.
Okay, sorry.
Perfect. Hello.
Had some trouble getting in this morning.
No problem. Thank you for joining in.
Good to see you.
I was just saying before I get to some of the questions, does anybody from our panel have anything or remarks that they would like to say before we start?
Yeah, I will. Thanks, Megan. I just want to thank everybody for participating in these. This is the fifth, I guess, in a series of these that we've done around the riding. I'm committing to doing some follow-up ones over the next couple of weeks as well. I wanted to, before we get going on the questions though, address just an interview I had done the other day with Moose FM in Huntsville, where some people seem to construe that I was suggesting that we should get the economy up and running immediately, sort of like Donald Trump is proposing, and that is certainly not the case. I've said that these panels are about finding out about the gaps that exist in current support programs for people, and we're eager to try to make sure we fill those gaps. We're trying to send out as much information as possible for people to know where they get the support that they need. But I also have said that these panels are about discussions with the business community about what startup looks like. And we will only obviously do that when it's safe to do so. But I believe it's very important for us to have these conversations now so that we are ready to go when it is safe to do so. I expect that conversation to continue over the next several weeks. And I also believe that over the next several weeks into months, perhaps, that we will get back to starting up our economy. But I've never advocated once that we should do it before the medical officers of health tell us it's safe to do so. So I just wanted to get that off the top, and thank you all for joining, and we're looking forward to answering all your questions.
And if I may, I'd just like to thank Scott and Kirsten, who I'm sure did all the work getting this, a lot of the work setting this up. Thank them for all the work they've done in organizing these meetings, and thank the mayors for participating as well. And I'm sure I'll get lots of opportunity through all the questions to make comments, so I'll leave it for the questions.
Anything further from anybody else?
Scott, thanks for organizing again. One of the challenges we've had is certainly dealing with residents trying to cope with COVID-19. But certainly the other piece of it is that we're still trying to struggle with, and that's the businesses. So it's good to take some time to focus specifically on the business side of things. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
And I'll just pipe in and also say thank you very much for creating this opportunity. I'm looking forward to the discussions over the next couple of hours.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So let's get started. Our first question is, does anyone have a plan if this continues all summer?
Yeah, I could start on that one if everyone else is fine with it. So it's my sincere hope that we're at least partially opening the economy up before summer, and I think the recent modeling is tending to show that. So, the modeling from a couple of days ago is in the general public showing that we're at the peak or starting to win. I think the chief medical officer of health, when it was briefed probably 5 days ago, said that the reproductive factor, which indicates whether you're winning or losing, if that's below 1, you're winning. If it's above 1, you're losing. And it had been 1.48. It was down to 1.06 about 4 or 5 days ago. So I think as long as we keep up with all the things we've been doing for the near future, the social distancing, staying home, etc., we're doing pretty well. That's in the general public. In long-term care, as the Premier's been very clear, we're right in the middle of a big battle, and we're not doing near as well, and that's a hugely challenging area. But certainly, I think we have to, and I know there's some questions about this that will be coming up about what happens if we lose summer completely. And having been in a primarily seasonal business before, certainly that question is in my mind as well. And I think it's something that if we come to the worst case scenario, government's going to have to deal with. But for now, I remain cautiously optimistic. And the government of Ontario has formed a committee to look at jobs and recovery. And that's led by Rod Phillips, who's the Minister of Finance, and Economic Development Minister Vic Fideli, and a bunch of other ministers that are on that are checking with various different sectors and making a plan, which I think we'll probably start to hear more about as in the next few weeks to come out of this. So I remain cautiously optimistic.
Thanks for that, Norm. I would just add that, as you can see from Norm's comment, that the decisions about what happens is being driven by science, and that's important. I think the simple answer to the question, though, is no. I don't think there is a plan if it continues on for the summer, but I assume that it would be more of the same, which is why it's so important for us to continue doing what we're doing right now. The isolation is what makes sure that we're not spreading this virus any further. Because if we continue on the path we're on, we just can't sustain this amount of debt, government debt. It's a crippling thing. It's going to be painful to pay it all off, and it is going to have to be paid off. And the more we add to it, the more difficult it is. So I hope that reinforces the message that what you're doing is the right thing. Stay home. Make sure that we can not just flatten the curve, but eliminate it completely.
And from my perspective, I do believe the vast majority of people in Muskoka are doing exactly what you talked about, Scott. Maintaining that social distance, staying at home as best they can and doing the shopping. I think one of the concerns as this situation starts to improve, it will, is how do from a provincial and a federal level, how do we start moving towards what now becomes essential business that are not presently considered to be? And I think really that is a really significant question. I think many of the businesses are wondering about when we start to unroll this to a new era. What are those businesses that are going to become essential, and gradually how does that happen? And to be fair to everyone, I think that's the concern, is how do we do that, and how is it fair to those businesses in comparison to other businesses? And I think that's a critical part of the next rollout as we move through the summer.
Anything further to add from anybody else?
Well, I'm just going to add to that and to what His Worship Paul Kelly just said, and I see it's one of the questions that has also surfaced in our Q&A, and I think it's a critical one, talking about, with the optimistic approach that I have, that I believe that we'll get closer to normalcy over the next couple of months, not farther from it. And that is around marinas. Marinas are now closed to the public, but we do know at a certain point, the optimism, at a certain point, they'll be allowed to serve the cottage population that relies on the marinas. And they would like to get ready. And it's not clear from the current regulations to what degree they can actually operate behind closed gates, if I can put it that way. Can they actually prepare boats, even launch boats, just not allow the customers access to those boats in the short run? And I think that's the type of thing we need clarification on, because if we're going to open up down the road to some degree, we have to allow our businesses to get ready for that time.
Maybe if I could just add something else that from a Gravenhurst perspective, our economic development team headed by Jeff Loney, along with the Chamber of Commerce, they are working with businesses here right now, trying to look towards what the future might look like, and they continue to be available to all businesses in Gravenhurst to try to work with them. They created what's called a business concierge line, where they can actually contact and talk about what steps might be able to be taken to move forward to this new reality. So I just want to give a shout out to them, because they are working with businesses right now in Gravenhurst.
That's excellent.
May I respond to the marinas question just briefly, and I think it'll probably come up in further questions as well. I've been doing a series of teleconferences with different businesses. I did have 17 marinas on the line last week, and certainly they are currently in a difficult position because of kind of the gray area and the essential, non-essential list, that they, in many cases, become the gatekeepers as to who can launch their boat or not. And that's not a great position if you're a marina and having to get into a fight with your customers as to whether they'll let you launch your boat or not. So certainly for a bunch of sectors, from these calls and from the teleconference I've done, I have written, and specifically and brought up in caucus, one of the businesses I brought up as marinas, trying to allow them to start to do some work before we get back to whatever the new normal is. For example, I heard from marinas that have millions of dollars of sold boats that they need to deliver so they get the cash flow going, so because they'll be paying interest on these new boats. And so I've requested that they be able to, in a safe way, be able to start preparing those boats. But also, I think at some point it will make sense to allow marinas to be able to launch boats for water access properties to check on their property. Because I know if I owned a water access property and hadn't seen it over the winter, and with some of the strong winds, et cetera, we've had, and higher waters, if you're on Georgian Bay, I'd probably want to see whether I had a dock or whether I was missing half my shingles and that sort of thing. So hopefully, as we win the health battle, that we can ease up on some of the restrictions.
Great, thank you. I'm
Megan,
gonna jump.
before we continue, so whoever has not muted their computer, someone's getting emails and the bells are going off. So if all the panelists can mute their computers so that the notifications don't continue.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to jump a question just because it's in line with this, and you can tell me if you, the panel, feel that you've already answered this, because it's similar to the first one. It's just more industry specific. How will the governments be assisting local tourism if this continues in the summer months? Is there anything that you would add additionally?
Sure, I'll start. As I said in the response to the first question, my hopes are that by all the actions that people across Ontario have taken, that we will be easing out of this at worst in the summer months. But certainly in my role, I've been asked by the Minister of Tourism, Sport, Heritage and Culture Industries to conduct a survey of Parry Sound Muskoka businesses, but also getting all my caucus colleagues to do the similar thing in all of their ridings. So that's sort of in play right now. And Leslie Daw, who's my executive assistant, is on the line. So I will ask her to, on the chat part, post a link to that survey so that any businesses that would like to give information can do so. And it's about kind of getting hard numbers as best we can at this point, essentially to bolster the minister, Lisa MacLeod's weight, I guess you'd say, or arguments at cabinet to be able to do whatever it might be possible to assist in those sectors, especially tourism, which is so important in our riding. But I really think, I was in the lodge resort business for 30 years prior to this, and frankly, I'm sort of happy I'm not right now, to be perfectly honest, because in the 30 years I was in business, we certainly had some challenging times around 1980 and 1990 when there were recessions, but nothing like this. And it's, how a business that may have, very much diminished revenue or no revenue, I think the question is going to be, can they, how do you survive? What do you do to survive? And I would hope that government is going to be looking at that carefully to see what we can do to make sure that we still have the same businesses around next year and that we don't lose them because of COVID-19.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. Will there be any funding relief for mom and pop seasonal tourism businesses that do not have staff? And will there be any funding for new owners of mom and pop businesses?
Yeah, I can start there. This is one of the issues that we continue to raise with the government, that the existing programs don't cover an awful lot of these truly small businesses. In response to that, they have made significantly more money available to the federal regional economic development agencies, and so in our case, that's FedNor. I spoke with Ron Bégin at FedNor. He's our regional rep. And he had indicated that the details are still being worked out about how that will happen. But it appears as though Muskoka Futures will be the vehicle in the Muskoka context to help, the really truly small businesses. So that's it's one area. There are a number of other links, and I encourage people to, go to my Facebook page where we actually highlight and list a number of these things.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
Maybe what I could mention is that at District Council this week, Mayor Coetzee could probably verify as well, the whole conversation about mom and pop businesses, period, not just tourism, came up to District Council on Monday, and to see if there was something that we could do regionally across the entire district of Muskoka, and that the conversation around that is going to continue at the committee level. And I do believe that we're sensitive at the district level as well as locally to try to figure out what some ways that we can do it. And certainly, as you know, Norm and Scott, that federally and provincially, those funds are going to be needed to make that happen. But the district is, as a group, are looking at and seeing what we can do.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on to the next question. This one is a bit lengthy, so bear with me while I read it because there's a setting to it. So, as the possibility of opening for this season becomes increasingly problematic, i.e. hyper-sanitized cleaning, social distancing, constraints, a greatly decreased public appetite for travel and tourism, the loss of business momentum, and the same Ministry of Health requirements for a shortened season when and if we can open, with no income and only expense ahead, including deposits that are in part spent that we will have to return soon. Question is there something that our township, district, province, in Canada can do in 2020 to help our small owner-operated businesses in terms of leniency or even grants towards taxes for property and 2019 HST due to help us from falling into greater debt this year? Accessibility to an interest-free loan would help, but it would help even more to have reduced expenses for a non-producing year.
You want to start, Scott, or do you want me to go?
Yeah, I guess this is one of the issues that we continue to raise with the government, that there's an awful lot of truly small businesses that loans won't help them. They can't access the wage subsidy because that doesn't work for them. They're too small. And so it's one of the reasons why, as a party, we've been advocating for the government to do a return of the net GST collected for the past 12 months. So this would be, remarkably cheaper than an awful lot of the programs. It would cost the government about $13.5 billion, but it would get cash into the pockets of the truly small businesses, and it would be a very simple thing to do. Um, Everyone that submits, it's easy just to, do a few keystrokes on the computer and return their GST they collected for the past 12 months. So this is one of the things we continue to advocate for. So far, the government has not accepted this as an option, but has tried to make other programs available, as I mentioned before, through FedNor and Muskoka Futures. We continue to advocate on behalf of the small business and the tourism and seasonal nature of businesses all around the country. The Prime Minister has said in his announcements that there will be more for the tourism industry specifically. We just don't know what those details are yet. So we just continue to advocate and push for some answers.
Yeah, I'll go next. And Scott, I agree. I think your proposal is one that would work and be simple to do and get money into the hands of a small business. So I hope you're successful with that. Provincially, the provincial government has pretty much deferred every fee permit that is in the provincial realm. So in total, it's some $10 billion in deferrals, but it's things like WSIB, I think it's deferred to the end to September, August 31st, I believe it is. And the education portion of property tax gives municipalities the ability to take that 1/3 of property tax and defer that if they so desire. Things like the employer health tax, the exemption has been doubled, which is $355 million for business. And we've set hydro rates at the lowest price in the time of use. I think it's like 10 cents a kilowatt hour. It's for the foreseeable future. So it's been mainly about doing things in the provincial sphere to help with cash flow, I would say, and make it so that where you don't have any money coming in, you don't have to pay for all those provincial costs. Is primarily to this point what the province has been doing.
Great. Anybody else?
So, from Gravenhurst perspective, and I guess also throughout all the municipalities in Muskoka, I mean, we're trying to address something there's no roadmap for. And so as we address them, for an example, when we decided to defer tax penalties, we all decided to do that and move it to the end of May. I mean, at the time, we thought, okay, maybe by that point in time it'll be over. But there's a good chance that this is going to be extended, water and sewer penalties as well. I mean, I think we're trying to deal with this as it goes. And I suspect as the next few weeks come forward, there'll be more businesses coming forward to find out from the province and from the federal government and from the town. What can we do to assist them to make it through this very difficult time? But I think, and things like extending those kinds of penalty deferrals is probably helpful to some degree, but it's not gonna cut some of the issues that they have to deal with.
Okay, great. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think the deferral of property tax deadlines as an example that we can do at the municipal level. That's a form of obviously interest-free loan, but I think in many cases, just as Mr. Kelly brought up, that won't be enough for some organizations, especially if the summer is at a much lower level of activity than it has been in the past.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question I think is to everybody on the panel here. It says the pandemic crisis has and will continue to test the resilience of our communities, our food systems, our economic systems, our health and community support systems. How are you as leaders looking to learn from this experience to help us become more resilient in the future, in particular to the challenges posed by the climate emergency?
I'll start off with this one because I have to take a turn. I think this is an excellent question because I do think that what this highlights to us is our vulnerability to the pandemic. So we have to address and how we can better handle that in the future, because for everybody, it's a learning experience. And frankly, I think overall, we've done quite well under the circumstances. Obviously, there's always room for improvement. But I think also one of the lessons we must learn from this is that the climate challenge, the climate emergency that we face is a far greater threat to our long-term future than the COVID-19 pandemic is now, and that's lessons that we should take from all this is how do we better address that, I'll call it big monster behind us, in a manner somewhat similar to the way we address the little monster that's in front of us right now.
And maybe I could add to a little bit more on the issues of what we're trying to do at the Gravenhurst level, at least anyway. I've been contacted with some businesses that have never had to sell online. They've never had to go down that road, so they've consequently never had a process in place to do so. But I know from Sandy Lockhart from the Chamber and from Jeff Loney, our economic development manager, that they've been working with businesses, and I've had a couple call me and say, how do I do this? How do I get my business online? Because I've never had to do this before. And I think one of the things we're doing is trying to help people move their business into that kind of format. And maybe that's more sustainable anyway. The challenge has been for many, many years, how do businesses make it through the winter? And this has forced many businesses, I believe now, to look at alternative ways of doing business. And I do believe maybe when the silver lining in all of this, when it's all over, is that there will be businesses that will see a new way of doing business, that the way they were doing it may not have been always the right way. And I think the advice that they're being given through the Chamber and through our team as well here, I believe they're moving in a direction, hopefully, that will be sustainable far longer than the pandemic.
I guess I'll go next then. Yes, and Paul, I bought some things from the local Canadian Tire using the curbside pickup, and I think it's a lot of work and challenging for the stores, but it actually worked fairly well from the perspective of the consumer, being me trying to make that purchase. From the provincial perspective, certainly, I think, especially at the onset of this, when everyone was clamoring for PPE and N95 masks, and then you had the President Trump saying they wouldn't ship N95 masks to Canada until the Premier got involved, and we received some of them from 3M. I think it certainly has made us realize we shouldn't be quite so reliant on the rest of the world. Typically the USA is fairly friendly, but with the president they currently have, it's pretty unpredictable. And of course we get a lot from China as well, and I don't think we should be counting on that. But I think the good news is all kinds of Ontario businesses have stepped up and are now producing or in the process of producing all the vital supplies we need. So you have Woodbridge in Southern Ontario, which primarily is businesses, automotive foam, now making a Health Canada certified N96 mask, which, it's a big company, so I assume they're going to be producing a lot of them. You have Muskoka Brewery making hand sanitizer. You have distilleries making hand sanitizer. You have the Spartan test kit invented in Ontario, of which the Ontario government, as it ramps up testing, has ordered some 900,000 of them, which is they're to give results within an hour once operating, and that's all through the Ontario Together website. So I think, especially for these key supplies, and the Premier's been very clear about that he doesn't want us to be reliant on other jurisdictions, or certainly not outside of Canada, into the future, and that where possible, especially with Ontario being the manufacturing hub of Canada, that we should be able to produce just about anything we need right here in Ontario. And with reference to the part about climate change, I would say that we are one world, so it's a little different. So obviously in Ontario and in Canada, we want to do our part, but we need the entire world to be able to do their part to address the climate change issue.
A perfect segue for me to start. Thanks, Norm. This is a really valid point, though, about climate change and what we need to do to mitigate our impact on the planet. one of the things that we face as a challenge in this country is, of course, that we have immense resources, um, and we're not able to use it. Elizabeth May, actually, the leader of the Green Party, was proposing that as we transition away from fossil fuels to alternative energies that have lower carbon output, that we should just focus on using our own resources and not importing foreign oil. And I think that there's merit in discussing ideas like that. It would make us more self-sufficient and reliant on ourselves and resilient. But of course, we have to have that conversation in the context of a country that has become really one of the wealthiest in the world based on trading. We have to trade with other nations because that's truly the source of the wealth that this country does have. So it's an important discussion, but we have to make sure that we don't become too isolationist and try to close down borders, because global trade is important for not just the well-being and the resiliency of Canadians, but of the whole world. So these are important discussions, and how we proceed to open up our economy in a less carbon intense way is an important thing that we need to be talking about now.
Great, thank you. Anything to add before we move on to the next question?
Sure, I'll add something. Scott, I'm just in where I usually spend hundreds of hours a month driving my vehicle around the riding, etc. I've taken to reading the time that I would usually be in the vehicle. So I just finished reading Sir John A. Macdonald's speeches. So we could go back to his policy, the national policy, where the country was much more self-reliant. Essentially, through a few elections, that was his policy he was striving for.
That's a good point. I'm actually reading the Laurier speeches right now. I actually quoted it, and I got to say, between Macdonald and Laurier, we had a couple of pretty amazing prime ministers who believed immensely in this country, and were constantly positive about the potential and the opportunity for this country. And I genuinely do believe that it behooves us all to think about the opportunities and potential for Canada and Canadians in the positive, hopeful tone that Prime Minister Laurier and Prime Minister Macdonald did. Good point, Norm. And by the way, that's a great set of speeches. I've read that one. I have it in my library as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to use the time that we have right now, instead of reading constantly district council agendas and Gravenhurst agendas, to get away from reading. So I'm spending more time on Netflix than anything. However, I do appreciate those. One of the things that just another comment about diversity and diversifying. It's fascinating that how many businesses, Norm, I think from certainly at a provincial, but also federally, that have adapted their machinery to be able to produce things that they wouldn't have normally done. I was talking to my daughter yesterday as an example. She works with a company called Bugatti, which provides a lot of leather goods and golf-related things, and they've now did a switch over to do COVID-19 surgical masks. And there's all kinds of examples of that are happening. And I think somehow if we can encourage from a provincial and federal level to let people know that these businesses know that kind of diversity and being able to switch gears quickly and knowing that they have support to make that happen is a pretty important step in us being reliant on ourselves and sustainable.
And I could just add, whenever I go to buy something, it's tough buying things that aren't made in China these days, but I have a bias against it. So just about anything I buy, if I can buy it and have it not made in China, I do so, because every time I buy something from China, I think of the two people that are incorrectly, improperly imprisoned in China, the two Canadians.
Right on.
Thank you. Anything else to add before we move on? No? Perfect. The next question is a little bit more specific, I think, to a local business. So it states, reopening date, phased reopening, criteria to be fulfilled in order to open. Specifically, I have completely separated self-contained cottages within 75 to 100 feet apart where self-distancing can easily be observed. Can I open?
Guess I'll start on that one. Having formerly been in the lodge resort business, I would think that sort of business should be one that, as we win the health battle, that for the points made in the question, would be one that should be able to start opening. I know based on some of the calls I've had, I have written to the committee headed by the finance minister, the Jobs and Recovery Committee, with suggestions, and brought up in my caucus as well, with suggestions that I'd heard from marinas about, especially if this is over, you don't just flip a light switch. They need time to get boats into the water, and if everybody wants them once, that's not physically possible. So being allowed marinas, for example, to be allowed to prep boats to go into the water for the season for water access and other people ahead of time in a safe way, and to allow them to deliver boats so they can collect money. Companies like landscaping, which I'm sure can be done in a way that's maintaining social distancing. That's one of the fields I have brought up. I think there's others that you will be able to do in a way that's maintains social distancing, doesn't negatively affect our health. And I would think that a cottage resort, or with individual cottages as compared to a downtown hotel, would probably be able to open earlier than would some other businesses. Golf courses, another one. Of course, we have a ton of golf courses around Parry Sound, Muskoka, and I know I've been Don Mackay, the owner of Muskoka Highlands, has emailed me with a 3-phased opening plan, which I've forwarded on to both the tourism minister and suggestions to the Jobs and Recovery Committee, because I think you can open a golf course in a way that maintains social distancing, and with protocols to sterilize golf carts if they're using perhaps only one person on a golf cart, and other protocols, so that those many golf courses all around Parry Sound, Muskoka might be able to open. And not only that, there's mental health and physical health benefits for people that have been cooped up for a few months that would like to get out and walk around and get some exercise as well. So I see this industry, the cottage industry, small cottages, as being one that certainly has possibilities of opening earlier.
Okay, thank you.
Norm, my son is the executive director for Golf Ontario, so he'd be very pleased to hear what you just said. And certainly that's exactly one of the businesses that talking about easing back in. Could you do it fairly simply? Probably. Again, with protocols put in place to be able to contain the social distancing and so on. But absolutely, that's a good example of potentially something that could happen and done fairly easily.
And if I can respond to that, I did bring it up with my caucus and as well, the most recent time we got together in a big Zoom call, and received a whole bunch of support from many of the members. So that was encouraging as well.
Great.
I can't help but add, but I think it'd be even better if you open up a golf course and you don't give people golf carts, then they can do a lot more walking, which they might need to do after all that reading and Netflix watching they've been doing.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move to a question that came through the Q&A, just because it was in line with what we were talking a little bit before with online and businesses going online. So it says, the businesses are looking for alternative ways to do business, which includes going online. The government has had to adapt as well. However, will all levels of government be willing to continue to invest and use the technology they have been using when we return to somewhat a normal life?
I'll start if no one else wants to go first. I think, basically probably the core of that is having broadband and internet access available more, especially across rural and northern Ontario. And certainly that is the goal of the provincial government. There's a 300 million, I believe, over 5 years that's earmarked towards that. But it's a very slow process. And in our area, the most recent things I've seen are in the whole riding in Carling Township. They just did using unique, I think it's tower to fiber technology, hooked up another 250 homes with the assistance of the government, and Seguin Township is looking at something similar. I believe that in Muskoka Lakeland Holdings has just acquired Core. I think it's called Core, and has some innovative technology that they're planning to expand their connectivity. But it takes a while to cover the whole provinces, and Parry Sound Muskoka with the unique geography and rocks and trees and remote locations that we have. But it's certainly the goal of the provincial government to improve that and invest in that.
Yeah, I would add to that I've been in conversations specifically with Lakeland actually about their project. This is one of the areas where there was a question in the Q&A panel, and for people that don't realize, I'm actually typing answers to there as well, so I am paying attention to both. But one of the things that the Minister of Infrastructure has put out a call for is shovel-ready projects as soon as we are able to get rolling again. And I'm also working with my colleagues in my party on a rural internet or a rural broadband strategy with some audacious goals to cover, rural Canadians effectively with broadband access sooner rather than later. It's a strategy that we'll be proposing to the government, and there's an awful lot of local providers all over the country, and certainly here in Parry Sound Muskoka, that do have shovel-ready projects and are ready to go and are eager to expand their networks. And so these are the kinds of things that we need to be pushing for, and we need to ensure that this is part of our startup. Broadband access is today's roads and bridges. It is the modern day, crucially important infrastructure of a modern economy. And so, we have to have all levels of government working together and making sure that we are expanding that network as quickly as we possibly can. And it also includes working with private sector partners, which I'm encouraged to see us doing.
Maybe Scott, I could add to that. One of the challenges is, and we've knew this before, but certainly now that we've got kids working from home and being online, we got parents at home working online. They got X number of computers all trying to operate at the same time with limited speed coming in and out. And but as much as all of those, the having internet available, the other piece of it is it also has to be affordable. So getting internet across the province is fantastic, across Canada, but there's a lot of families that can't necessarily afford $60 and $70 a month for internet access. And I do believe the providers, the other piece of it, I believe, in my conversations with some of the providers, is they also have to look at the affordability for many people that are needing it. But at the same, it is, as you said before, it is not just a nice to have. It really, we're in a world where you must have it. And I think that providers have to look at how do you make it affordable for those people that don't necessarily have the kind of money to make broadband internet rurally accessible. So I think there's two pieces: having it, but second of all, making it affordable for those people that need to have it.
I may comment on what Paul, sorry, Peter, what Paul just said. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And we're certainly, and I think on one of the other calls we had with one of these meetings, the question of overage charges came up, and certainly it's really significant. And it's not, $50 or $60.
Right.
It's sort of the luck of the draw depending on where you live right now. Our location I live in, just north of Parry Sound in McDougall Township. Until about a year ago, we had one monthly bill as high as $550, and I'm sure that's what some people that are now all of a sudden using their internet to, for their kids' schooling, et cetera, are running into. Now that has changed now just because of some upgrades that Bell made. So now my maximum bill is $60 a month, but it was quite exorbitant, I think, at just a year ago. The Ontario government, in terms of the education part that you brought up, has the Minister of Education's made a deal with Apple and Rogers to try to get cheaper service where it's possible. So they and providing iPads as well. So they bought 21,000 iPads, and then the boards are getting them, and then the boards are determining how they're handed out to people in need, and it comes with service as well, where that service is possible. Now in Parry Sound, Muskoka, Rogers isn't going to cover everywhere, but that's one of the things the province has done specifically with regard to education to try to especially get it to those that can't afford it or don't have the iPad or don't have the internet.
Norm, you just covered what I was going to bring up, and that is the education side of it, where we have a certain portion of our residents don't even have computers or internet connection at this point. And if their kids need that for an education, their education, then we have to find a way of getting that service to them.
Anything else to add to this before we move on to the next question? Okay. The next one says, retail rent relief, not a debt-based relief. So I guess they're looking for, again, we kind of talked about this beforehand with regards to the loan. So anything to comment on that?
I think probably Scott will want to lead on that.
Start with that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Norm.
No, I was going to say you probably want to comment.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that this is something that the Prime Minister has announced, that he was chatting with the premiers about a rent relief program for small businesses, and this is going to be something that obviously would be very helpful in a lot of the communities in Parry Sound, Muskoka, because so many of our main streets and cores of all the villages are full of shops that rely on seasonal business. So he has proposed rent relief for April, May, and June. The details of that have not been released yet, but they have promised it, and we hope to see something soon. As soon as we do, we'll make sure we get the information out to everybody.
That's great.
And so I'll follow up on that. Say yes, there are, I guess, negotiations going on with the premiers and the Prime Minister, and hopefully we see details soon. But certainly, I'm sure that Paul and Peter have talked to businesses as well. That retail businesses that I know I've talked to some that haven't been open very long, and all of a sudden they're classed as non-essential and they have no revenue coming in.
Yeah.
But they still have to make the rent payments. So that affects all kinds of main streets. It affects all kinds of restaurants, although some restaurants have some revenue coming in with either liquor or takeout, but lots don't. So it's kind of critical, I think, to many businesses to help them survive through COVID-19.
Yeah, and certainly further to that, we're getting to the end of the month again, to the end of April, and those rent checks are going to be expected again. And so, yeah, the sooner we can get some answers for those people that are in that rental situation, probably the better, because at the end of each month, this just becomes a greater problem.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that. I think we could also ask the landlords to show a little bit of patience if they possibly can, because it's better for them to get their rent a little late than to force the tenant into bankruptcy, because they might have trouble finding a new tenant in these challenging times.
Good point.
Yeah,
Sure.
and back to you, Norm, with regard to those, I've had the same thing where there's some businesses that have literally just opened when this happened, or just before it opened, and then all of a sudden the door gets slammed. I mean, who anticipates this stuff's going to happen?
Mhm.
And they got to figure out a way now. How do they even come back to begin the business when they haven't even really been able to start? So yeah, that kind of relief. And you're probably right, Peter. I do believe that there are some landlords that are really conscious of that issue and are looking at it, but there are those that are still stuck with those that want the rent paid.
Well, and some landlords are in their own financial straits because they've just invested in that building improvements, and so, but yeah, we can just hope that everybody works together and are patient with each other.
Yeah, right on.
Thank you. So the next question I think is a good one too, because it'll help. I know there's been a lot of confusion towards what the province declares and then what municipalities or districts declares. So it says, preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery are the 4 phases that all levels of government will have to plan for in the years to come. For most, we were in shock and not prepared, not knowing what as a municipality should close or remain open, and without clear direction from the province, i.e. launch ramp closures. What steps moving forward could we put into place at the district level stating what is to close when Ontario declares a state of emergency province-wide?
I'll jump in at least at the beginning on this one. You know, it's what's fascinating is the use of the term emergency. And we use that term emergency in a lot of different ways. We had flooding emergency last year. We're now hearing the word climate emergency. We've had a pandemic emergency. And, you know, with each one of those, we talked to our emergency management team yesterday. With each one of those, there's a question about what does that emergency mean? What's the implications of declaring emergency, a climate emergency? What's the implications of having a flood emergency? And every one of them is a little bit different. It's not all the same. However, we are faced with, and I know Mayor Coates here and I have talked about the whole concept of declaring emergency. What does it mean when you declare an emergency to your municipality? And I know, Peter, you probably want to jump on that one. But I think, you know, there is no simple answer when you declare an emergency and what are the ramifications of it, because it does vary depending on what the actual emergency is.
Well, yeah, and we made the decision in our township to declare an emergency, not because we expected the province to come to our rescue, which is sometimes the case in some emergency declarations, but rather because it gave us a little more flexibility in responding to matters as they came up. I also think interesting this question, the reference to the launch ramp closures, because that was a very active debate in our township. We eventually decided to close the ramps, and I can assure you that many people were quite pleased and many people were quite upset. And yeah, there's no question that the province could have given us more guidance, but at the same time, in fairness to the province, this is also new to them, and you don't have the time to do a very carefully crafted and reviewed piece of legislation. You do the best you can in very short order. So I'm not trying to be critical of the province whatsoever, and I think it's a little bit of a cop out. But I know if I can just go off from the launch ramp. I mean, one of the issues that has come up over and over again is access to properties, and of course we have an abundance of water access only properties, which is not the case in the majority of the province. And that's a real issue. They've been blocked. They've been water access property owners have been blocked from getting to their property through marinas, and a few of them wanted to use the launch ramp in order to get there. And now they've been blocked from that because they were included in the group that were like the recreational boaters who had no property in the area. So it is a dilemma. I'm sure we're going to learn from all this and improve things going forward. Hopefully, we won't have another pandemic to face in our careers. But who knows next year whether there'll be a revival of this and we have to revisit it all again. But I think also this is an opportunity as we slowly back down on some of the restrictions in place that we can improve upon the decisions made by saying, okay, well, certain restrictions maybe were not as clear as they could have been.
I can comment on the boat launch part of that. Certainly, yeah, there definitely was gray area in terms of the essential, non-essential with regard to boat ramps, and municipalities have made different decisions, probably depending on their unique situation as well. So Township of Muskoka Lakes, I think their boat ramps are open. Where I live in McDougall Township, they put big physical barricades up to block the boat ramps. I think Georgian Bay, you've closed yours. I was talking to the mayor of, and he was on one of these calls earlier, Dale Robinson from McDougall, and they have plans to sort of phase in opening of their boat launch, but only for residents of the township. So there have been different approaches, but my understanding in this gray area that boat launches can be used for certainly emergency people, fire, etc., police, fire.
Yes.
They can be used for residential construction is on the essential list, and it doesn't differentiate between seasonal or year-round homes. And I asked that question specifically the first opportunity I had. So construction companies would be able to use a boat launch to be doing construction as long as the work was started before April 4th, or if it was a renovation, as long as it was started before April 4th. So it's kind of evolving. I know I've spoken to the Carling Township as well, and their boat launches are currently shut, but I think the mayor is contemplating a phased or partial reopening of them for certain purposes. But I guess there's bound to be some gray area, and I wish it was crystal clear and black and white for the sake of the marina operators as well, and for the municipalities, because you're put in a tough spot.
Oh,
And and certainly in Gravenhurst, because it wasn't mandated, it wasn't in order to close boat launches. Some have interpreted different ways. However, in Gravenhurst, we have not closed boat launches. They're still public access. But the interesting piece is, so many people have their boats winterized and wrapped, and they're sitting at marinas, and they can't get them out anyway. So even if they wanted to use the boat launches, they can't even get their boats out to do that. I mean, I live on a lake, and so far all I've seen is a rower and a sea-doo. And so those people that happen to store their boats at their own location and winterize their own boats, yeah, they could have access, but the vast majority can't even get their boats in because they can't get them out.
And it is a bit early, and it's been snowing quite a bit lately and pretty high winds. So not exactly the sort of weather that unless you're a construction person and want to get to work, that you'd necessarily want to be going out.
Yeah, this time last year, there was still ice in some of the bays.
Right on, there was.
Yeah, it was April 29th. I think it went out here last year.
Yeah.
I'd just comment. I'd like to actually get back to sort of the original question about planning ahead and having a more comprehensive plan. Municipalities have emergency plans for things that they're used to dealing with. Floods are a good example, like that was mentioned. I think it's important to note that governments have learned from various different things that have happened in the past. So I was chatting with Tony Clement, for example, who was the Minister of Health in Ontario when the SARS outbreak happened. They learned from that. Before SARS, there was no such thing as a federal medical officer of health, and now there is. So I think the question is a really important one, and it's a valid point to make that we must learn from this. And of course, once we're through it, I can assure you that there'll be all kinds of debate in the House of Commons about what we could have done and should have done differently to stop the spread of this. There'll be questions about whether we should have closed the borders to air travel sooner, for example. And so it's my hope that those debates and those discussions will actually form the basis of a whole new pandemic plan, because there's no question that is in a globalized society like this, these kinds of things happen, and they will happen again, and we need to be better prepared for it. So I think it'll be a very important exercise for not just the federal government, but working in partnership with the provincial governments and municipalities to put together a proper emergency plan that says if something like this occurs again, based on science and medical information, these are the steps we take, and this is the time frame in which we take them. I think that we have to do that. If we don't learn from this, then we're doomed to repeat failures again. And so that's going to be a major push from certainly from me. And I know that the medical officers of health, they base their decisions on science, and they will all, I'm sure, be working on making sure that we're prepared with a better plan going forward for what may come again one day.
Thank
If
you.
I can just add to that, I think one of the things that is very good is the fact that we're watching all levels of government working together more actively than they often have in the past. And I mean, this round table is just one example. We got all 3 levels of government on this round table, and I think if we can do more of that together going forward, it'll be better for everyone.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to jump to a question from the Q&A, and just a reminder to all attendees to please pose any questions you have through the Q&A option instead of the chat. This one's specific to a business. Says, my small convenience store is allowed to continue to operate, but we are doing curbside pickup only to protect our staff. What are the rules around curbside pickup for alcohol and tobacco?
I guess I'll start, and my answer is I don't know the specific rules with regard to how, how you do that. I would expect the stop the spread phone number should have that, and let's see, that's 1-888-444-3659. So I would hope that they would be able to provide an answer to exactly the mechanics of how you do that. Certainly the government, even if you're an essential business, the government can't compel a business to be open. It sounds like what this operator has done is a smart way of operating to maintain their safety and their staff's safety. So it sounds like a wise move that they've taken, setting up their own protocol, but hopefully that number might provide some more information. And I have on the line my executive assistant, Leslie Daw, who's monitoring the chat, and we will endeavor to respond to any questions that come up on the chat or other ways that we have access to get more fulsome answers.
Thank you. Anybody else? I might actually add to this one just with regards, because my background with operating with alcohol and having a liquor license is that you might, to the person that asked this question, they might want to go to the AGCO, which is the Alcohol Gaming Board, and get their direction from them, because it sounds like you should be operating with a liquor license regardless to have that option. The next question is, with chronic disease being an underlying factor in the majority of COVID cases, would you agree that health and fitness related businesses should be some of the first businesses reopened? Given proper social distance and sanitation protocols, businesses like ours help people with both physical and mental health, both which are sorely needed services right now.
Yes.
I would agree, in that I find that for some of us are very fortunate that in my case, I have spent a lot more time this past month on my feet than in my car, and I'm actually a few pounds lighter. I'm quite enjoying that fact.
I wish I was. I think I'm a few pounds heavier, Peter.
Well, you're welcome. I just think that the more people can be physically active, the better it will be for them in so many ways, and that I think anything we can do to encourage that, I think would be very responsible.
Speaking from a Gravenhurst perspective, one of the facilities that we had to close down was our Y, which is pretty popular. The Centennial Center and the Y portion, and the YMCA, the programs that they offer, as well as a lot of the programs that are out in the community that we had to cancel as well. But certainly those that use the Y, and there's a lot, really do miss that opportunity. I think one of the fallouts from this will again be, maybe some of the long term will be how these businesses, as well as many others, have put in new practices for people coming into that business, whether it's the grocery stores who now have different practices now. And I suspect that the Y and other recreational facilities are going to have to relook at how they used to do business, and maybe for the long term that those practices need to be maybe significantly different. And how do you distance people equipment wise when you're in working out, and all of the things that go along with that. I think it's really possible, but you just have to relook at how we do business. Sanitizing equipment becomes a big issue. How far apart are they going to be working when they're in the gym, as an example? When they do groups, when they're doing that kind of thing, how do they work that? So I do believe the Y and other organizations that offer those facilities are going to be looking at it pretty carefully, because what we don't want to see, if these all get started back up again, as a resurgence, because that's what we're concerned about now, is what happens if it. So I think long-term protocols are going to need to be in place. Just like I wouldn't be surprised to see stores like the grocery stores maybe have some long-term protocols that may have just happened right now, but maybe they need to keep them on longer.
So yes, I would agree that it'd be great to get the businesses that encourage physical exercise going. I mean, through the pandemic period, basically I've been walking for exercise, but as I mentioned with golf courses earlier, there's certainly a physical and mental health aspect to getting some exercise. But I'm sure there will need, health has to be the primary concern, and the protocols to make sure everybody is protected, because really until we get a vaccine, we're going to have, it's going to be a new world out there. And a vaccine, is, if there is one, is a year is about the best time frame I've heard for that. So, but certainly this is the sort of business to be great to get open as soon as we can do so in a safe way.
I think it's interesting to note that after the SARS epidemic, you started seeing more and more offices and stores with hand sanitizers on the wall. And I can just imagine after this and places are open, there'll be more and more of that type of facilities to allow protection of ourselves as we are enjoying whatever services they're offering.
Thank you. The next question is actually a really good one, and I think it speaks to the population in our area. When will we be seeing funds available for small businesses that do not qualify for the $40,000 loan because they have no payroll? As most of our small businesses in MacTier are individual operated owned, we have rent to pay and other expenses. Is there funding coming for the really small guy whose sales have dropped by 90%? Or are they going to be the ones that fall into the 62% of businesses that are not being able to reopen once this is over?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, but the Prime Minister did announce the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. They say that it will cover rent for small businesses for the months of April, May, and June. So it'd be retroactive for May. They say that the implementation of the program will require a partnership with provincial and territorial governments who are responsible for property owner / tenant relationships. And they just keep telling us that more details will be available soon. So at least it will be retroactive for April. And as soon as we have more information about that, we'll make sure we get it out to everybody.
Okay, thank you. Anything to add to that? Okay. Is there any relief available for small clubs that won't be able to execute their fundraising events because of COVID-19?
I probably will jump on this one because this actually brought it up at a recent committee meeting at the district level. In many places, certainly in Gravenhurst, I suspect in other locations, the service clubs have often provided funding for agencies within their municipality, and that's certainly been the case here in Gravenhurst. Groups like the Rotary Club and Lions Club, and they've devoted a lot of the monies that they generate through bingos and so on to help those agencies. The problem is, of course, as this is articulating, is that the problem is they can't run those activities. So it's not sustainable for the service clubs to be able to be the source of the monies to help groups like, in our particular case, GAP, Gravenhurst Against Poverty, or the Salvation Army Food Bank. So the challenge is that how do we continue to provide that support for them? So I know federally there was announced, I believe it was on Monday or Tuesday I think it was, that the federal government was putting forward $350 million to assist with community groups in helping in exactly what I've just been talking about. And Norm, I believe the province also announced 11 million as well to do similar kinds of things. So, I mean, that relief is going to be really important because these agencies are in need, desperate need. We did something at the district level where we've taken some of the money the province provided, and we've provided social service relief fund, and so that money has been distributed. The district will be receiving 1.3, I believe, million from the province to assist in doing this, and the first half of that has been allocated, about $656 million. $656,000 has been allocated to these agencies, but it's because they really need this support. And things like GAP, they're delivering 200 meals a day, or on their Thursdays when they deliver those. On the others, Salvation Army Food Bank, there is a need, and so we've got to. And also recently in Gravenhurst, we have a fund called the Terrence Haight Fund, which was a donation made when Terrence Haight died, and there was $1 million donated to the community, to a corporation, to each year allocate. So we've taken some of that money and specifically now earmarked it as a result of our council meeting on Tuesday. So I think we hear that concern that's coming from the service clubs, and I want them to know that both the district and locally from our perspective. We're trying to do that. And it's with help, Norm, for the province and also Scott from the federal level that we can do that kind of stuff. Because if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have the funds either.
Sure, I guess I'll jump in. Thanks, Paul, for recognizing the province has made a contribution, and there's supposed to be $200 million, I believe, in total going to help nonprofits and food banks and municipalities around the province help our most vulnerable. And there's been some other initiatives like for seniors, the guaranteed annual income system has been doubled for, I believe, the next number of months. And for festivals, et cetera, that are going on. So the funding that they were counting on through Celebrate Ontario will be flowing regardless of whether the festival is actually able to operate or not operate this year. For and also Triumph Foundation funding for support for festivals, et cetera, would also be funding even if they don't operate this year. So a few different initiatives. But in terms of service clubs, I certainly want to recognize and thank the service clubs. And we have a brand new one in Georgian Bay Township that we had the Zoom meeting for their charter meeting. The Lions Club of Baxter Ward just got going, and that's great to see a brand new service club in Parry Sound, Muskoka. That's the only charter meeting I've ever taken part in. It was by Zoom, but our service clubs all around the riding do so much to help out. And Parry Sound Rotary Clubs delivering food to people that can't get out of their home and to seniors, and they're doing all kinds of things that I wouldn't even be aware of. So they are so vitally important around the riding.
Yeah.
And I can say that Baxter Ward Lions Club is already actually well before they became chartered, very active with the local food bank, supporting numerous families in the area.
Great.
Great, thank you. The next question is, as a business owner of an essential service, will I be provided with a document that shows not only my store can be opened, but I can also access my seasonal residence, boat access only, as a 4-hour commute is not feasible?
I'll start, I guess. No, I don't think there's about to be a document authorizing that. For any particular questions, again would go to that 188 number. Doesn't provide legal advice, but it does provide advice on essential and non-essential business at 888-444-3659 number. And certainly, as I've said, in the difficult situation the water access properties are currently in, I certainly would be lobbying for marina operators to be allowed to launch water access boats at least for the minimal purpose of being able to check on their properties, which I think any property owner would feel they should have a right to be able to make sure they still have a building there. So I will, the minimum to begin with, be asking for that.
I can tell you that there are many a marina operator, to say nothing of property owners in our area, that would greatly appreciate any support and lobbying you can do on our behalf for further clarifications. At the very least, I think allowing marinas to prepare, because they're optimistic that sometime in the near future, people will be allowed to access their properties by boat. But it takes the marinas a month to get ready for the spring onslaught, and if they're not allowed to do it until a day before everybody wants their boat, it's going to be very difficult for them.
Right. Okay. Next question is, how do you think small businesses should prepare to bounce back after this COVID-19 situation?
I think that's an extremely difficult question, in that it will vary from business to business, but I would suggest that at least one thing they have to do is be prepared to operate under possibly continued physical distancing, or at the very least having hand sanitizer available and things like that. That they, depending upon the nature of their business, I also think that for some businesses, having an online or telephone ordering system, if they don't have one already, might be something they would consider. But each business is different, so each business will have to adjust in their own way. And I wish them all great success at that, because it's it's a new business challenge that didn't really exist a few months ago.
And I
You
guess
know,
I'll
go ahead, Norm.
open on this one if I can, just say that, I think for a lot of businesses at this point, it's surviving this COVID-19 pandemic is going to be top of mind, but I expect it to be a new normal, at least until there's a vaccine after this is over. But certainly I think for that possibility and to help businesses survive, from my perspective, it will be lobbying to allow businesses to open that are safe to open as early as possible. So that's what I will be trying to do for, obviously with health as the first priority, so we don't take a step backwards by allowing businesses to open, but opening and getting some revenue and is the best way that they can survive. And then I'm sure we'll be operating under new protocols.
It also means people can get back to work who are now sitting home with minimal cash flow, if any.
Okay.
I think it goes back to a conversation earlier that we were talking about, where businesses right now have had to make those changes in order to survive. Grocery stores are the best example I could think of, where they've really put in some protocols to make it happen. They were forced to do so. And I think those businesses that do start to come back online, this isn't going to be the way it used to be. I don't believe it's going to be the way it used to be immediately, that you're going to open your store and everything's just going to continue the way it was. I think those businesses that want to survive are going to have to do the same kinds of thing grocery stores have done, which is, how do we accommodate people? How do we isolate? How do we keep the distance? All of that stuff, as you say, the hand sanitizer. I mean, those practices have got to be put in place for those businesses now coming on stream. And they've got examples that have worked well. And the grocery store, I look at Sobeys and the independent grocer in Gravenhurst, and how great job they've done of organizing it to make people safe. And I think those new businesses coming on are going to have to figure out a way to do the same thing.
Okay, thank you. So our time is nearing the end. I'm going to pose one last question and then to last remarks that our panel may have. This question is this: would like to hear something about what our mayors thinks about all this, and do they have any plans to help people here?
Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think all mayors, just like everybody else that are in various levels of government, are all taken by surprise, and we're all adjusting to this as we go along, and we're all learning lessons. So what do I think about all this? I think that it's very challenging, and I don't want to in any way suggest otherwise. I mean, we have people who are facing bankruptcy, whether it's personal or business, because they don't know if they can recover from the lack of business the last 2 months, or the lack of salaries. And I think but we've also learned that we can support each other if we, and I think we're seeing some of that happening at the same time. And I think we have to understand and respect and appreciate how much most people are willing to work with the rest of us in the community for the greater good, if you will. I think that's part of what we have to learn. We have to learn that from this, and make better plans for the future when we face our next emergency, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's from weather or who knows what else will come along. But I think that the bottom line is that we have to be better at supporting each other, whether it's officially through various government agencies, or whether it's just personally. I mean, I'm shopping for 3 households these days because we have elderly people in the family who are not able to go out, or are scared to go out. And so, I think we all have to be better neighbors as part of this as well.
Thank you.
And from my perspective, Peter, not unlike yourself, I was saying to some people the other day, I probably haven't worked as hard as I have in the last 5 weeks with emails and phone calls and teleconferences and Zoom meetings. I mean, literally sitting at my desk at home from 8 in the morning till 6 at night. I'm trying to respond to people, trying to deal with issues. I'm sure Norm and Scott, you're the same way. And unfortunately, there is no roadmap for this. and we are trying to deal with it with each day that goes by. But one of the things that I believe is really critical, and I think we all continue to do that, it's around the whole issue of communication. And communication to solve any or deal with any problem is the critical part. Quite often through this last 5 weeks, there have been times when people have misunderstood, they have misinterpreted, they have read into things, and part of it is we either haven't done a good job of communicating, or they haven't done a good job of reading, or it's all that part. But there's a couple parts of communicating. One is listening, and the other part is speaking. But finally, I think the piece that bothers people at times is the fact that we don't do anything. It's fine to listen, and it's fine to speak. But the end result is, I think people are looking for us to do something about it. And I believe the federal government, I think we talked about this before, federally, locally, provincially, I think we're trying to deal with this as it comes along. And yeah, could we do better? Probably. But I do believe that from a municipal perspective, we're trying to be as open as we possibly can. And I see that provincially and federally as well.
Great.
Now, I'll add to your communication. I've been receiving communications from quite a few people, not always pleasant, of course, but these are people who have never communicated with their municipal government or other levels before. I mean, some of them are saying that quite clearly. And I think that's actually, I believe, a good thing that we're receiving that much more input.
Great. I think this was a good segue to kind of get into closing remarks. Does anybody have anything to add before we end this?
Sure, I'll go. I just want to again thank Scott and Kirsten for organizing this Zoom meeting, and thank you to all the businesses that have taken part. Thank you, Mayor Kelly and Mayor Coetzee, for your very good comments that you've made, and it's really appreciated. All the hard work that you are doing through the COVID-19 crisis. And I would like to, again, to mention that my executive assistant Leslie Daw is on the panel, and we will certainly note any provincial questions that weren't answered and endeavor to answer them. And otherwise, I just want to thank everybody for all the good social distancing you're doing, and together we'll get through this. So thank you, everyone.
Go ahead, Peter. Go ahead.
I'd also like to add my thanks to Scott and Kirsten for organizing this, and for the opportunity, and for everybody who supplied their questions. These are, as you've heard ad nauseum, unprecedented times, and there are lots of challenges, and I greatly appreciate all the patience and support that so many people are giving to each other during these times. I think that is we have to emphasize that there's a lot of positive thoughts and positive support taking place during these challenging times, and I encourage everybody to be a little bit patient. And I think the more we follow our guidelines, the sooner we're going to return to some form of normalcy, which I think is the goal of all of us. So thank you.
Yeah, and finally, just a real thank you to Scott. Thanks for doing this, and Kristen for helping to organize it, and for our moderator, thanks for doing that. Much appreciated. But also, I think what is important here is that I think the business community can at least say that they've been able to vocalize their concerns. One of the things that I think is important is to recognize that we do have a council that wants to try to address those concerns. We do have a province, we have federally. We also have a Chamber of Commerce and our economic development team that want to work with the business community. One thing I would say, don't assume. If you're in a business, don't assume anything. If you're not sure, ask, because you may be making the wrong assumption. I often believe that whenever we use the word assume, we get ourselves in trouble. So ask the questions. If you're not sure, we can provide the help, and we'll try to get the help if we can. But thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And I'll just sort of finish this up and wrap it up. Thank you, Megan, as well, for being our great moderator. Thanks to my good pal, Norm Miller. He's been involved in every single one of these, and along with Leslie, his executive assistant, and to both Mayor Coetzee and to Mayor Kelly. Thank you both. And thank you to all the business owners who have participated in this, and the chambers of commerce who have helped set this up as well. I would like to sort of reiterate, I guess, what's already been said, that, we are all working on behalf of every one of you, and we don't necessarily have all the answers, but we will definitely commit to getting the answers for you. I can assure you, you're all very well served by your local officials. These are two very compassionate and hardworking mayors who I've had the pleasure of working with in my previous life as a mayor. And of course, I've known Norm for a lot of years, and no one's more committed to Parry Sound Muskoka than Norm. So I just thanks everybody. My staff person, Kirsten Baker, is on this as well, and I want to thank her. She's been getting a lot of extra emails thanks to me directing people to her. She's remarkably capable and far more knowledgeable about a lot of things than I am. So thanks everybody for joining. We will do another one of these as a follow-up, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And then, any new information we can get out to you. And we also want to obviously continue to hear from you if there are any new issues arising. So thanks again for participating.
Before we leave, I also want to say thank you on behalf of the Seg Bay Chamber, and I also do want to introduce Sandy Lockhart to speak on behalf of the Gravenhurst Chamber of Commerce as well. So we'll get Sandy on there.
Thank you very much. I just, first I want to thank your TV, and I want to thank everyone for organizing this. It's a great service for our members and for us, for everybody to communicate. We've been working closely with the town of Gravenhurst, and we've reached out to over 250 businesses, have data on over 100, and the town's had one-on-one consultations. We've had amazing conversations. I just want you to know there's a lot of businesses out there who stepped forward and tried to create medical supports, and they were almost there. They had staff volunteering, they had things happening, but it's not as easy to make it happen as you think. There are shortage of materials we've all heard about. So we hear the stories in the community that are doing supporting, but there's a lot of people who've tried and haven't been able to. So I want to make sure people know that. The other thing I'm really impressed with is all our businesses and their resiliency. And while there's a lot of people really struggling, they haven't quit. There's the CEBA, the Canadian Business Emergency Grant, that's been our account that's been enabled people to pivot, make changes, plan. And I have to say, the other thing is that still our many businesses are falling through the cracks. So please continue your good work to advocate on behalf of the small businessman. One thing is those who have automated, who may be sole proprietorships, while they were rewarded in the past for automating, it actually puts them in a challenging spot of not having the payroll too. So we've been talking to businesses. They love this kind of, I love having this information. I'm going to encourage even more of them to take part when we do this again. So thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. We appreciate you coming on and continuing the work that you're doing to advocate for business in the Gravenhurst area. You do great work, and we appreciate it very much. And keep us posted. Anything you're hearing, we want to make sure that we're advocating on behalf of all businesses all over the